Hi, everybody. It's Joe Cioffi on this Saturday morning, coming up on just past 8:30 Eastern Time. Thought we'd get the day going. We'll update you on what's been going on overnight with respect to the weather models in Florence. We're also going to take a look at Tropical Depression 9, which is likely to become a tropical storm. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on Tropical Storm Helene because that is uh, furthest east, and it is impacting the Cabo Verde Islands. But we've got enough to talk about with Florence and Nine, and if I get some time left, of the remnants of Gordon. So let me get right to it. We're going to we'll just start off with the satellite view with respect to Florence and the East Coast from overnight. You can see it out there spinning away the east coast of Florida. There's also some disturbed weather that is to the northeast, I'm sorry, to the northwest of Florence. The Hurricane Center mentioning this. There's an upper trough that's there. It doesn't look like it's having any real impact on Florence at the moment. It could be part of the process that's going on as the upper atmosphere readies for Florence as it moves westward. A bit of an upper high developing there, and it looks like those clouds are kind of turning on the edge of that. I'm not entirely sure uh, what's going to wind up with that system, other than the fact that either some of that moisture is going to get somehow entrained in all of this, or it'll just move out to the east northeast. There's no sign on the models of anything developing out of it, so we'll see. The more important upper trough is going to be extending southward from the North Atlantic. Is not going to get anywhere close. So we are going to continue to see Florence move on to the west. I'll bring up a close-up satellite loop here, and let me get the. We'll start with we'll use the long wave infrared. And one of the things that's been happening overnight is that it really does look like the shear has been abating. Look, by the way, the center is actually down uh, on the southern end of all of the cloud tops. You're starting to see the enhanced clouds beginning to wrap around the low center. There's more on the west side, that it seems, than there is on the east side. Still definitely a tropical storm, but definitely in the process of getting organized. And also, it has been moving south of west for since yesterday, and it continues to do that. While the storm has been in a weakened state, it continues to lose latitude, which is going to be very important when we go to when we get to closer to the East Coast. If it had gained some latitude now, if it was sitting, say, at 27 or 8, I don't think we'd be talking about an East Coast threat. But that is obviously not the case. Instead, we went from being up near 25 north down to 24 north. I know it's only 60 miles, but that can make a huge difference. And we might still have this going toward the south of due west course for a little while longer. Then it'll probably straighten out and start heading westward. Here's the Hurricane Center's forecast uh, for um, Florence. This is as of the 5 a.m. advisory. We're still seeing 6 hourly advisories on this, 24 and a half and 54.2 west. We're not at 60 west yet, which is what I've been saying is where I want to see this. Top winds are up a little bit to 65 miles an hour, moving to the west at 9. And this is going to become a hurricane if not to later today. It might take a little more time as it's kind of still in the process of rearranging itself after all that wind shear. But it will probably become a hurricane on Sunday. It might be as early as the early morning hours. And notice the Hurricane Center strengthens this to a major hurricane by 2 a.m. Tuesday and has it getting perilously close to the southeast coast of the United States by 2 a.m. Thursday. They are basically taking the center of the envelope of weather models. I'll show you the track models in a second, but the intensity model guidance overnight was actually pretty impressive. It went higher. A number of models have this as a Category 3 hurricane and there's a solid cluster of them taking it to Category 4 status by in 84 hours. Most of the models have this as a Category 1 hurricane in 36 hours, which would be that's going to take us to 6Z Sunday, so by roughly by noon tomorrow, sometime tomorrow morning, having Florence reach hurricane status. The tracking models are, again, very tightly clustered. You've got one outlier that recurves it as it gets just to the west of 70 West, but virtually all the other models have some kind of landfall. Some of them as far north as Chesapeake Bay, others concentrated along the North Carolina coast, and then you have a few of them that are on the South Carolina coast, and then the southernmost outlier takes it to Georgia. The Canadian model kind of looks like that southernmost outlier. Perhaps it's a shade further south. The European, which I'll show you, takes it like it did yesterday, near or just east of Charleston, right along the South Carolina coast, and the GFS brings it to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So we really didn't see um, the models come in very much. The northernmost outlier remains the GF, or the northeasternmost outlier remains the GFS. The southwesternmost outlier remains the Canadian, and they really didn't close the distance between them. Maybe we'll see some change in that today, but we haven't so far. And by the way, the ensembles on the GFS seem to be concentrated near the North Carolina coast. There are a few of the members that take it offshore. You see the dark black line is the average position. I've said many times, and I'll say it again, I'm not a huge fan of using ensembles as a forecast tool. And one of the issues, by the way, to remind you, is the fact that a lot of the members here, the resolution on the models on those members is less than the operational run. In other words, there's basically less data that goes into it, so it might be missing out perhaps the ones that are recurving it too soon, perhaps missing out on the strength of the upper high that's going to build. Hard to say, and I just find it confusing when you have too much to look at, I suppose. Now, I think there are two important variables to pay close attention to, and we'll get the European here in a tighter view. And as far as Florence is concerned, the European's difference between the other models is the fact that it has a stronger upper high, and you can see it here as it kind of pokes its way northwestward. Just watch how the flow changes off the Atlantic seaboard, and with this upper high that pushes into the mid-Atlantic states. It's kind of anchored east-west. The hurricane gets cradled under that and gets pushed to the South Carolina coast. Makes sense in terms of how the model is structuring everything. The two questions that I have going forward with respect to the forecast, and this is, by the way, for Thursday evening on the European, the two big questions I have are which all the models have roughly the same idea. So it's really going to be a matter of how strong is this upper high and how intense is the hurricane, because the European model, if you look at the pressure on the European model, it's in the 960s when it comes ashore, but which would probably put it as a strong Category 2. But what if we do wind up with the Category 4 hurricane on the approach, which is what the GFS is saying. And remember, as a more intense hurricane is going to likely respond to the flow in the higher levels of the atmosphere rather than the lower. That could mean for a more northerly course as it approaches the coastline, and it might actually help to weaken the ridge just a little bit. The GFS has a slightly weaker upper high, so it brings it to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. It actually, on the 6Z run, kept it offshore, and that was interesting. And then it does this kind of crazy stall and drops it southward and sits it off the North Carolina coast and then kicks it out to the northeast. The Europeans continues to show, by the way, and I just want to put this front and center, as well, because uh, if the European is right, there are going to be some important land impacts to consider, and and this is with the Central Appalachians, because the European's track is so far to the left, it brings the remnant low into the mountains of West Virginia and Virginia. This is an area that's gotten some places have gotten 3 feet of rain in the last 2 months, and the ground is absolutely saturated. Rivers and streams are filled to capacity in a lot of areas. This is probably the last place that you would want to see a remnant low from a tropical storm sitting for 24 to 48 hours, because then we're talking about a ton of rain here. So this is going to be really, really important to pay attention to. If the Europeans' more westerly track is correct, the Canadian is the furthest west of them all, and I think it may have as much to do with the fact of it building the ridge. Actually, it builds it back westward, but it's a little bit further south than the other models. And it also has perhaps the weakest profile of the tropical system as it comes inland. It actually takes it inland over Georgia, not too far from Savannah, and back across into Alabama before it dissipates. I think we can look at the surface map, and it doesn't have it quite as deep. You know, I've been so used to the Canadian model spinning everything up, and it's kind of guilty of that today. It has, you know, it looks more like a Category 1 hurricane. So by keeping it weaker, it moves it more to the west. Uh, you're looking at conditions in the upper atmosphere, and that are going to be exceptionally favorable for strengthening. We'll, I want to see it materialize in order to kind of gauge where we're going to be going forward. Let's switch to the northeast for the short range and for the Ohio Valley as well, because we do have some rain issues going on, and this is all due to the remnants of Gordon, which on the I'm going to use the NAM model from overnight. You can see there's a surface low there in southern Missouri, so there will be another round of heavy rains today across Missouri through the southern half of Illinois, Indiana into Ohio, where we have flood watches up. There's been some rain this morning in parts of southeastern Pennsylvania and New Jersey. That's moving southward and out, but this area is going to be moving in for Sunday. The old cold front from Thursday comes back up as a warm front, and the rain could be fairly substantial in some areas as it lifts up to the northeast. I don't have too much of an argument with the rainfall forecast amounts that the NAM model is giving here, which is a fairly large area of 3 to 5 inch rains across the zone from the southern half of Illinois through much of Indiana, except the extreme north and the extreme south, virtually all of Ohio, and almost all of Pennsylvania getting some solid rains. The 2 inch line gets to about New York City and eastern New Jersey, with a little bit less on Long Island, but the rain amounts, with some of the excessive amounts being showed up in Pennsylvania of 4, 5, 6 inches, falling in an area where we've where was that was hit with a ton of rain during the month of August. So this is, you know, not welcome news from that respect. So let's at this point, I'm going to jump to, we'll go to Tropical Depression 9, which is also in the far eastern Atlantic, and the model track guidance is also rather tightly clustered. I want to pay attention to this because this is forecast to strengthen in another day or two when it gets out of where it is right now, where there's some shear going on. And it is forecast by a number of models to strengthen to strong tropical storm or hurricane status. And with the course on this forecast to be mostly west, this could reach the Leeward Islands by Thursday, and this is the last place that needs to see a hurricane, considering Irma and Maria from last year. So this is going to be watched. It looks like the track wants to be west along 15 degrees north, which would mean that it would pass south of the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, assuming that that track idea continues when we watch models. There are a few models that try to turn it before it gets to the Leeward Islands and keep it mostly offshore. So it's not not all of them are taking it westward, but the global models, both the GFS the GFS and the European, do take it westward along 15 degrees north, and the Canadian actually turns it east of the leeward. So you see the intensity guidance. You have a cluster of the intensity models bringing it to Category 1 hurricane actually as soon as 60 hours from now. I don't know that one outlier has it all the way up to a Category 4, but the most of them seem to be either strong tropical storm or Category 1 hurricane. So and conditions are favorable for strengthening. We can come back and just quickly take a look, because I want to at least spend a couple of minutes with you guys on the board and get to a couple of questions. Hang on. So here we go. That's what happens when you're actually I want to use the region next to that. So here's the central, here's the tropical Atlantic on the GFS, and you've got the three systems there. Helene is the furthest west, moving into the it's already affecting the southern parts of the Cabo Verde Islands with winds and rain. Depression 9 in the middle, Florence on the to the left, and the Depression 9 becomes at this point, with looking at the pressure, as a tropical storm and just kind of rides along 15 degrees north. Notice that Helene strengthens considerably here, actually quite rapidly, as it moves past the Cabo Verde Islands and then turns northward, because there is a trough. You see this another low that spins up at about 34 and 42, and that creates, there's an upper trough that's going to develop there, and that is likely to pull that up to the north, and from there it'll just be pretty much a fish storm the way it looks. So that pretty much kind of covers what's going on this morning. One of the things, when you're looking at the overall pattern, you get closer and closer to a threat for a hurricane. Oftentimes there's a bit less to look at with respect to the upper air, because you already know pretty much what's going on, and it's just a matter of trying to get the last pieces of the puzzle to fall into place. That can be a very frustrating thing to wait for, but that's, I think, where we are at right now. Scott Leary, West Virginia, has had major historic flooding in 1985. It could be a repeat. If the European is right, I don't want to overplay it at this point, because we still haven't really quite worked out the sort of details of the landfall position and which model has the better handle on it. But it's a little distressing that the European shows this, because of the fact that that model does have a history of doing well in situations like this, and that would have, to take a remnant low into those mountains would be a huge problem, considering all the rain that has fallen. Okay, let's see. Jason Schaefer on this morning. The feature north of Florence shearing it at all? No, I don't know. I don't think so. It doesn't seem to be having any impact that I could see on the satellite. Florence is the shear has definitely abated, and you can see that the circulation is better defined. Antonio Tejada, Florence, any Long Island impacts? I would say, based on what we're seeing right now, the impacts here would probably be minimal, and I'll put that in quotation marks. The impacts would be minimal, and they would be mainly regarding the high tides, which will occur because we do have a new moon, and also so there would be some coastal flooding and some beach erosion with that. I didn't really see any tracks that would suggest that there would be a direct hit. Let's put it that way. Maybe you'd have to worry about some rain from it if you wind up with something that comes into, say, eastern North Carolina and then rides up northward and then turns northeastward at some point where you get into the rains. But I'm not seeing, right now, if we're talking about a landfall uh, down in, say, South Carolina or Georgia, there might not be a whole lot that happens up here. If you take a remnant low into the central Appalachians, you may leave most of the rain to the west. So, but I wouldn't stop. I think we still have to pay attention because we could, there could always be some sort of last minute shift. It's not likely, but there could it's always possible. So we want to make sure we're staying on top of it. Shelly Man Studios. I think the odds for the Northeast getting a direct hit certainly have diminished over the last couple of days, but they certainly have increased for the Southeast coast. Uh, um, for the Southeast coast from Florence, they've definitely increased there. 99 Wolves. Florence, I think will, it does look like it's getting better organized. And as long as that continues, yeah, I think it will become a hurricane by tomorrow morning. Brian DeCalvo, thank you very much. Appreciate you hitting super chat. Thank you. Really appreciate, really do appreciate it. And I wanted to see if you posted anything in terms of a question. I want to make sure I get to it. If you have, and because I can't seem to find it, um, uh, please repost. Christopher, the GFS has shifted east this morning on the 6C run. It did slightly. I don't, I don't really think the models were that much different than they were yesterday. They're kind of wobbling, back and forth. The European is pretty much the same. The Canadian is pretty much the same, and the GFS really is pretty much the same. It's a little bit further to the east. It does keep it just offshore North Carolina. I'm not, especially. Um, uh, oh, by the way, 99 Wolves. You just reminded me of something. What does GOAT mean? GOAT? Because a couple of people have put that up, and I have no idea what that means. Marion Reed, will TD be a problem for Jamaica for Tropical Depression 9? Well, it's well down the road. Right now, the models do take it across the Caribbean along 15 degrees north. They kind of keep it on a straight west course. A number of them do. And that's kind of unusual to have it move in a straight line like that. But if that were to happen, it would pass south of Jamaica, assuming it survives the trip across the Caribbean, because oftentimes the upper air winds of the Caribbean are not favorable for tropical systems. You get a wind shear, and that tends to take the systems apart a bit. But and we're talking as far as Jamaica would be concerned, with respect to Tropical Depression 9, we're talking probably next weekend. So there's a lot of time, and there certainly is a margin of a margin of error here involved. So so it might be worth keeping it if it starts to become a real threat to the um, if it starts to become a main threat to the Leeward Islands, then you may have to start paying more attention to it. But for now, I don't think it's too much to worry about. Amran Ackerman, the National Weather Service, a dangerous situation unfolding for the East Coast. No heads up on the main maps. Why? It's if you're referring to it's way too early to put up a hurricane watch, for one thing. Second of all, as my understanding is that they've actually already, have states of emergency in North Carolina, from what I heard. Um, and I doubt that there's a lack of information getting out there to people. It's been, I think it's been front and center on the news more than it's been in front and center um, in some other weather circles. But yeah, it's too early for a hurricane watch. The Hurricane Center, in their advisories, has made it very clear that interests along the East Coast should be paying close attention and making sure their hurricane plans are in place. That's really all you can do at this point. What storm system, Delvin, what storm systems or air masses should Boston be paying attention to? And if any hurricanes, how much for Boston? Attention for Boston. Nothing for that for Eastern New England, at least out of this. That the upper air pattern does not favor a move straight up the East Coast. Delvin, you need a trough to the west. You need to get those troughs like we had back in mid-July to mid-August to set up to the west in the Ohio Valley, and that is how storms move straight up the East Coast and impact New England or pass just offshore the New England coast. And we don't have that. We're in a ridge position, so that is basically the complete opposite of what you would need. Let's see. I'm trying to get to everybody's question this morning. If I can't, I'm going to try and live stream. I live on St. Martin in the Caribbean, monitoring this sharply. Jeffrey Jeffers. Welcome. Thank you for being here. The Florence is going to pass by to your north. There's no question of that. Depression 9, you probably want to pay attention to, since it looks like it is going to be going over the southern part of the Leeward Islands. At least most of the models have that happening. It's nice to know, Dave R., that you have no questions. Let's see. The GFS shifted slightly east, Christopher. Okay. If the storm intensifies rapidly enough, could Florence shift close to the Outer Banks or further east? I would say that a more intense Florence will perhaps mean for a more northward component of motion as it approaches, which could be why the GFS is doing what it's doing. It also might be the GFS's general error in wanting to be too far east with these systems, and how it's handling the upper high. That is a super short range question. In other words, we really kind of have to wait till we get into the short range to address which model has a better handle on the ridge. I will tell you that as long as we keep seeing Florence moving on a westerly heading of about 270 degrees, it's moving at 260, which is south of due west. Every hour that it doesn't gain latitude, in other words, every hour that we don't see a little bit of northerly component of motion in it, is problematic for a more, it's going to be an increasing problem the further south and west you go. That would favor the Europeans' idea of bringing something into South Carolina. And then you have the Canadian, which is even further south. We still may not be done with the southward shift. So we have to be very careful here in run to run to run. 99 Wolves, do you see a category 5? Let me say this. Certainly the models would suggest that this is all going to go to a category 4. Everything that I've seen in the upper air suggests that this should go to a category 4. Sometimes when storms get sheared out, they, especially after they've achieved a strong status before getting sheared, they sometimes struggle to get back to the way they were for some reason. I want to see what it does between now and tomorrow. How fast does it get back to hurricane strength? How much, how fast does it Florence had a very impressive satellite signature. I want to see evidence of that coming back. There is some evidence of that coming back this morning, but I want to see that hold on as we go through Sunday into Monday. As far as wanting it to get to a category 5, hey, the ocean water temperatures are running 4 degrees Fahrenheit above normal off the south in that area between Bermuda and the Greater Antilles. The water temperature part of the equation may certainly be there to get it at least to a category 4. Let's see. Bobby Livingsworth. So no, it will not be a Cat 5. That's every reason to panic. That doesn't mean that it can strengthen to a hurricane. That's the problem with always underestimating things. Well, this is Justin Harris. Okay, I think it will become a Cat 2 next week. Well, look, this is where you sit back and we understand what's there dynamically, and it certainly suggests that we could wind up, this is going to wind up being a major hurricane, but it's got to get there first. And I think this is where you kind of sit back and pay attention. They already, Robert's girl, thank you, already did have a state of emergency here in North Carolina. Um, okay, good, very good. Flying Hawaiian, hello from Hawaii, aloha from Hawaii. Thank you for being here. And by the way, you're watching Hurricane Olivia, which is going to do a weird thing and come in from the northeast. On top of everything that's going on, we have another unusual situation going on in Hawaii with Hurricane Olivia that's going to be actually coming in from the northeast, which almost never or rarely happens. Um, my gateway, yeah. Look, let's not let's everybody breathe, okay? Let's not get into a big fight over category 2, 3, 4, or 5. Um, take a step back. The potential's there. I think we all understand that, and we have to see if we have to now see if it materializes. The models say that yes, this is certainly possible, but I've thrown a couple of caveats in there regarding the shear and the fact that there are a number of instances where that's happened, where a storm gets undergoes a period of wind shear and weakening, and it never, even though the conditions say it should strengthen back to what it was, and for some reason it never quite gets there. But the potential definitely is there for it to get back to Cat 3 or Cat 4. How long can the ridge off the coast of New England stay in place for? Well, it will eventually erode, and that is going to occur probably after this is done. If it erodes faster, you could wind up if where Florence sort of moves around the periphery of the upper high as the western flank of it erodes. That's something we're going to look for once it moves inland. And eventually, by the way, we are going to see a collapse of the Canadian jet stream in the longer range into the northeast and mid-Atlantic, and start to get a fast flow, bringing down some air masses from Canada and moving things along. So the ridge is not going to stay forever. They oftentimes, the weather patterns eventually just sort of plant the seeds of their own destruction, and then they change. It's just the nature of things. Um, okay, hold on. Is there any chance this is going to have to be Javon Johnson? You're kind of in the line of things in South Carolina. I'd have my a definite heads up. You do have a growing risk for you. Lacey baby, is there any chance it could shift towards South Florida? Nothing indicates that it's going to see a shift that far south, Lacey baby. The furthest south model takes it into South Georgia. From what we're seeing, I can't imagine you'd see anything. You'd have to have a huge radical shift in track to as far as South Florida is concerned. Okay, at least from what I'm seeing at the moment, I can't imagine it would shift like that. Um, uh, the slower it moves, the stronger. If it moves fast, weaker. That isn't necessarily true, Luis. Okay, if a storm moves too slowly, it could start feeding off the waters that it upwells, and that can have an impact on strength. If it's moving at a fast clip, then it's got its momentum into the mix in terms of the strongest wind. So you have to be a little bit careful about those kind of generalizations because they don't always work. Justin Barrett, when are the dew points going to drop on Long Island? They actually should drop some later today and tonight. Some drier air is going to try and push down from New England and upstate New York and bring a little bit of humidity relief. We've got some rain. We've had temperature relief at least because we're only in the upper 60s to low 70s this morning. So that is a very good thing that we got rid of the oppressive heat and the oppressive humidity. Gomer's 4-4. Thanks for hitting super chat. I really appreciate it. So close, too close to call to Savannah, Georgia. You're on the southern edge of all of this. So in terms of what the model guidance shows, but I wouldn't dismiss it. I certainly think you need to pay attention. And again, thank you very much. All right, folks, I'm going to call it a day. Let me just remind you that I have extensive coverage here on my Patreon, on my Patreon page, where I have not only videos but also website posts, and you can support this channel by signing up on Patreon. And there's the link to it. It's just $2 a month, and that's it. Also, you can check out my website posts at meteorologistjoechaffee.com. My buddy Ben has New York City taken care of at nycweathernow.com. And then, of course, there's my Facebook page, meteorologist Joe Cioffi. I will probably live stream again late today or this evening when everything is in, and we'll take a look at things and see how it's going on and see what's going on. MH, thank you for the hit on Super Chat. Really appreciate it. Thank you. So again, probably do a live stream tonight on YouTube, and there will also be some extra posts on my Patreon page that won't be on the website. So that's another good reason to sign up there. And just as a reminder as well, another way you can support my channel is if you shop on Amazon. You can use the Amazon link that I have up there. We're a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for us to earn fees by linking to Amazon and affiliated sites. So if you shop on Amazon, you get your stuff, and Amazon throws me some coin out of their pocket, not yours, and we're all happy. Okay, have a great Saturday, everybody, and we'll see you later.